Ross-on-Wye, not quite from the motorway, the bit that you see thundering past on your way down south, but near enough. You might be surprised to hear that it puts me in mind of Christopher Nolan's The Dark Knight, the bit specifically where Heath Ledger says to Maggie Gyllenhaal, "Well, hello, beautiful, and you are beautiful, aren't you?" You might think she is beautiful. You might very well think that. I couldn't possibly comment. I'm sure she feels the same way about me. But the point is that beauty is supposed to be subjective, isn't it? As Margaret Wolfe Hungerford said in 1878, it's supposed to be in the eye of the beholder. But is it? Because I defy even the most hardened subtopian brutalist to look at that behind me and not be moved just a little bit. Ironic, really, as this here is the birthplace not just of English tourism, arguably, but also of the notion of the picturesque, an idea that the Reverend William Gilpin introduced to English intellectual discourse in 1782. It was based upon his observations on the River Wye and parts of South Wales, with particular regard to the idea of the picturesque, that he wrote in 1770. Took him a few more years to ferment the idea, but it was a rather overheated idea. I think it was taken and run with by a lot of thinkers of the time, and it was very much of the time. This idea that the soft curves of the landscape had to do with male desire, and they were counterpointed by the sublime, the awe-inspiring, the unknowable in nature. A little bit extract from the Prelude by William Wordsworth, as all those who've just done their GCSEs will know. And all of those ideas have fallen away. It's lovely, isn't it, when the associations of a word fall away and we're left with the thing bare. Picturesque, tourism, because this was where the Wye tour started back in those days. It was a substitute for the Grand Tour, the European Grand Tour, and it's a little bit like that bit where a couple of years ago during the pandemic where Anton Deck used that castle in North Wales instead of going abroad for I'm a Celebrity or whatever that nonsense is. But because of the Napoleonic Wars, the European tour was out off the menu somewhat, and the Wye tour had to stand in its place. But all those ideas, they've all fluttered away like ash, but we're still left with the view itself, and quite a view it is. Puts me in mind of my own theories as well as those of others. Cummings' law of progressive photographic disappointment, for instance, coined in Ripon back in 2016, I think. The idea that having taken the photograph from one place, you then think, no, I should have taken it from here, and then from here, and then from here, and so on. But the view changes as you get nearer. In some senses it fragments, like one of those optical illusions, where seen from one angle they represent a face, seen from another a series of disconnected and haphazard objects, and in another sense it gets more interesting. It's a mixture of the accidental, the way the spire pins the view to the sky above that loop in the River Severn, and also the deliberately picturesque elements, the mock Gothic town walls, the mock Gothic gazebo, both constructed in 1833. It's a sad indictment on my own Black Country childhood, though, I suppose, that whenever I see a picturesque vista of a town, my first thought is always, I can't imagine having grown up here.
It's got a few notes for you, Dan, on your performance so far.
Oh, okay. Doing that.
Having picked you up earlier on pronunciation of Gyllenhaal, Gyllenhaal.
Right, yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Margaret Wolfe, Hungerford, not Rutherford. Yeah.
Right, yeah.
Which we corrected.
Okay.
The last one, Gilpin.
Oh, more hard and soft cheese.
We need to knock this into shape because we've got curl coming up, haven't we? Or curler.
Right, yeah. And our... Yeah.
Neither of us have got a clue how to pronounce that one.
No, but I don't know. I think he's a big figure in the story of Ross, isn't he? So we need to get it right. On the other hand, as you said earlier, no one's watching anyway.
No.
So the unbearable lightness of being.
We could say what we like. Pronounce things how we like.
Yeah, Gilpin, pronounced luxury yacht.
I'm going to claim Ross-on-Wye for the West Midlands.
Okay.
We're at the southern reaches of the West Midlands, in Ross-on-Wye.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so people argue about the boundaries of the Black Country. One of the most controversial topics is whether Ross-on-Wye is part of Dudley Metropolitan Borough.
Indeed. Well, it is fairly much tucked just between Stourbridge and Halsowen, isn't it? If more or less.
An exclave.
Depending on the scale of your map.
An exclave.
An exclave, yeah. The accent's pretty similar.
And nestling behind that more famous shot, St Mary's spire, punctuating the view over the River Wye, is this, the Market House in Ross. Talked a lot over the years in these films about the indelible nature of certain buildings, the fact that if you took the building away, the nature of the place would be different. And like I say, it's a secondary sight bite, to use that phrase again. It's the second thing, I think, that people think of when they think of Ross. A little bit like when you find a particularly good picture of Richard Burton and Richard Harris in a pub together, and put it on your desktop and it covers over the important document from work and you can't find it. No, that's what it's like to me anyway. But there's something about it. It makes the high street worth it. The whole climb, the whole squeeze up that high street, culminating in this, seems to validate the whole thing. It seems to be so very much the place. There's loads that Ian Nairn said that's indelibly etched inside my skull. One phrase of his that often recurs in my mind is that idea of a view being a two-way responsibility. I think he says it at the end of Halifax, one of the Football Towns episodes. And it chimes because it's beautifully phrased, as was nearly everything he ever said, but also because it is so true and so rare as well. But because Ross is semi-designed by John Curl. We'll have to hedge our bets with that pronunciation, more about that later. The great benefactor, the man of Ross. This place, the prospect, was deliberately laid out as a pleasure garden which gave out a view to the surrounding hills and countryside, just as that view is returned in spades in the other direction. As I say, yeah, you could easily go on the computer and type in how is John Curl or whatever spelt, and you get that little picture of a mouth and the sound icon, and it says Curl or Kyrle or whatever else. But we were talking about it earlier, weren't we, Lee? And we decided to go for Curl.
We did.
And you were mentioning the Wolves player Keith Curl, weren't you? How's his name spelt?
Curle.
Ah, you see, now that's gonna be Curl, isn't it? It's not like Kyrle, is it? It's a bit like Pearl, though. One of my cats is called Pearl. My wife named Pearl, but it's spelled P-U-R-L-E, and she now claims that it's because of the purr that she spelt it that way, but it was because she didn't know how to spell Pearl, obviously. Inscribed on the other side of that arch, 1700, the very cusp of the 18th century. That century that became gradually more and more preoccupied with shaping the natural environment to our pleasure, landscaping, capability brown, etc. And it seems very distinctly an 18th century thing to do, to create a place as a viewing platform for a town, a two-way viewing platform, as I said earlier, a prospect that gives out and gives out on.
I like the use of the word prospect. It's I'm not aware of it being used elsewhere.
In what sense?
In England. It kind of sounds very Russian, like you get a Russian street name, isn't it? Prospect. I don't know if it means street.
Simply means
Nevsky Prospect is new
means
street, I think, in St. Petersburg.
Yeah, I think there is a Prospect Hill in Stourbridge, or roads leading back there. But again, it makes you think about that same idea as tourism or picturesque, the idea of the associations of the word falling away and leaving you with the thing whole. Is it its cultural or aesthetic associations, or is it just etymological? Is it just its echoes in other languages? Who knows?
I have to say your suit is matching the stonework here quite splendidly.
That wasn't intentional, but I think these particular tones are sort of, chameleonic, if I can coin a second phrase, having already talked about hardened subtopian brutalists, which I think is my own, earlier in the day. I think this suit is chameleonic for Cummings towns.
Yeah, it reminds me of that sort of 19th century idea, Dan Cummings' chameleonic linen and corduroy suits emporium.
Where's that?
I just made it up.
Oh, I was just
but
quite excited about going.
Somewhere in Cummings world, isn't it?
After we'd had something to eat.
Dan Cummings' chameleonic linen and corduroy suits.
Seems like the kind of place that would have a changing room like in Mr. Ben, where you could have adventures and all sorts, but we really do digress. I'm always slightly wary of the distorting mirrors of memory. You know, those stories that we apply or attach to a place and tell over and over again, and they become encrusted with our half-truths. Turn out not to be quite as we remembered them when we revisit the place. It's a good 10 years since I've been to Ross. A couple of things I thought were the case inside the church. Firstly, that there was an inscription of the poem that Sir Walter Raleigh wrote on the night before his death, and secondly, that there were living elms planted by John Curl inside. Both of those turned out to be true, but also not quite the case. Firstly, the inscription of the poem by Raleigh isn't for him, it's on behalf of someone else on someone else's memorial plaque, but it still puts me in mind of the idea of writing a poem on the night before your execution. It's like that horrifying episode of The Monocled Mutineer where the deserter goes through the night before he's shot at dawn by his own friends for deserting. And he was another of those incredible characters, like Charles I, who asked for 2 shirts, lest anyone felt that he was shaking with fear from the stroke of the executioner's axe. And I think Walter Raleigh said, "What art thou afeard? Strike, man," to the axeman, didn't he? As well as waxing lyrical about what sharper physician death and the blade was. Incredible. And the elm story turns out to be true, but the elms are no longer there. The last of their sort of semi-relatives died only last year, apparently. The very helpful gentleman in there was just telling me. He was apparently obsessed with planting elms all around the town. A couple of them grew up into the church. The people after his death thought that this was a sign of great munificence and kept them alive in the church in what was called Curl's Pew. They died, I think, during the restoration in 1878. I think someone pruned them and killed them. That would have been me if I'd have been alive then. I'd have been asked to go and prune, the semi-sacred trees, and I'd have had to come back and say, I've killed them. Sorry. Because I've never really had any success with keeping plants alive. But apparently there's going to be something planted in their place because of the last of the Virginia creepers that were planted to replace them died last year, and hopefully nobody at all like me will be entrusted with looking after them.
You weren't the person responsible for repainting that Italian fresco, were you, about 10 years ago?
What's that? I'm not aware of this story.
So, do you know? Oh, it was a really famous image. It was an old fresco, and it was a woman actually. I don't think it was you.
No, I don't think it was me.
I'd like to think it was you, but I don't think it was. A woman who says, "Oh yeah, I can do that. I can restore that fresco." So she kind of tried to restore it, and it went from being like this faded old image of Christ to
an Oxo advert.
It looked like a 5-year-old's kind of drawing.
A little bit like when Salvador Dali, had the Mona Lisa under secret guard transported to his house so that he could learn its secret and produce an exact replica. And then a few months later, he had it unveiled, this replica of the Mona Lisa, and it was an elephant's foot in the desert. As I said earlier, the gazebo, along with the mock Gothic town walls, were built in 1833, self-conscious follies. The gazebo itself, sort of mock Tuscan eye-catcher, and it sailed on through the century until I think 2009, when it appears on Rightmove for sale. I had a little look. I didn't like the interior furnishings at all. But I did like the idea of living there. It's up for sale again, and it made me think about the nature of changing buildings in terms of their usage. This is the summer of the crooked house, that crooked tale for crooked times, that state of the nation sound and sight bite, and that little tragedy that ensued so quickly, so suddenly. In fact, we were going to make a film back in March there, obviously something that will never come to pass, has led people to talk about the Crooked House law being passed. The idea that a building must be sold for at least a year before anyone moots any kind of change of usage seems more than reasonable to me. It seems okay that was changed to residential for me, because as a folly there was nothing happening inside it anyway, so to live in it would be an attractive prospect as long as nothing is done structurally to it. I think that is the key. But yeah, I'd like to wake up and look over those mock castellations to the surrounding hills any morning. few miles northwest of Ross, you get this, and the theme continues. Or should I say themes, for they are manifold. Firstly, that of the picturesque, the self-conscious interaction with the landscape. And then secondly, that of the crooked house. The idea of the demolition of a building, wholesale, for the whim of an individual, John Pollard Seddon, who demolished the previous chapel, which was only, I think, 35, 40 years old, for this bizarre, incongruous, Lombardic fantasy, complete with cloisters and campanile. And it makes you wonder, does it matter? Seen through the long lens, it's beauty that shines out. I'm not saying that it doesn't, I'm just saying that I don't know yet, like none of us do. It's a wonderful place, and redolent with the other theme, that of the encroaching death of the summer. It's a place to feel atmospheres very keenly, with it lowering above us, the light getting thinner, and thinking of the end of things. Poor Walter Raleigh, crouching before the Alp of the night of his execution. After they had beheaded him, they embalmed his head and they gave it to his wife, and she kept it in a velvet bag, a little bit like John Baskerville. A post-mortem existence, something we can't imagine for ourselves. And then there's that other man of Ross, Dennis Potter, to whom we paid tribute a couple of years ago, who also imagined a head, disembodied, living on into the future in Cold Lazarus. And atop all of this, there's a little whisper of something I don't normally feel, and that's predetermination. I feel like I was always coming here, that we were always going to film this. Don't know what accounts for it. Maybe it's that thin, encroaching September light, the whisper of the breeze dying in the hedgerows, the fragility of all of this. Who knows?